My wife issued a cold ultimatum over dinner, walked out for a younger lover, but I silently dropped the life she took and rebuilt my freedom now. The steak was still bleeding on the plate when she said it. We weren't fighting, we weren't even talking, just chewing in sync, like some god-awful metronome of a dying marriage. The kind of silence that's not peaceful. It's surgical, cold, clinical, like two strangers waiting for test results they already know are bad. Then, mid-chew, she pushed her plate an inch forward, just enough to make the silverware clatter, and stood up so quickly her chair screeched against the tile. That sound alone was violent. It sliced the air like she'd been rehearsing it in her head for weeks, maybe months. I've had enough. No context, no wind-up, just that. I remember how the gravy on her potatoes had congealed, how the ice in my glass had melted into a lukewarm puddle around the bourbon I hadn't touched. I set my fork down carefully like it was made of glass, looked up. Her lipstick was perfect, not a smudge. I remember thinking she dressed up to destroy something. And then I said it, finally. One word. No sarcasm, no volume, just release. Good. She blinked, thrown, like I'd stolen the punchline of a joke she thought only she knew. Then she scoffed, cocked her hip like a lawyer mid-cross-examination, and delivered the line she'd probably been saving like ammunition. I'm not asking, I'm telling you I'm done. I found someone who sees me. There it was. Sees me. The line from every cheap affair novel with the torn bodice on the cover. She wanted me to beg, rage, cry, do something that would make her feel like she still mattered to me in some twisted way. But I didn't. I just nodded once and stood up slowly, brushing non-existent crumbs from my pants like I was done with a meeting. Then I said, I'll load the dishwasher. I didn't ask who he was. I already knew it wasn't a stranger. Jade was methodical, calculated. She'd test the water before she ever jumped. She stared at me like she was waiting for the rest. Maybe an insult, a tearful plea, even a cruel jab. But there was nothing. Not because I was numb, but because I'd already been grieving this marriage in secret for years. Quietly, like a man watching his favorite bookstore turn into a vape shop. As I loaded the plates, she stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked out, heels tapping like gunfire across the hardwood. I remember the sound of the front door, not the slam. The click. Intentional. Final. I stood at the sink watching the water run over the plates and realized something odd. The smell of her perfume still hung in the air, but it was already starting to fade, just like her. And still, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt the first flicker of something else. Freedom? No. Calculation. She thought she had just ended the story. All she did was start mine. She was gone by Friday. Not a word to her parents. Not a call to her daughter. She just vanished from the house like it had been a hotel room she'd overstayed. The only proof she'd ever lived there was the faint perfume residue on the curtains, and 3 empty hangers spinning in the closet like some Hitchcockian afterthought. She didn't leave a note. She left a Spotify playlist. New chapter, new me. I found it accidentally when her old iPad auto-synced in the kitchen. First track, Girl on Fire. You'd think it was a teenager's breakup, not the slow disintegration of a 22-year marriage. By Monday, she'd updated her address on our joint credit card account. I got the notification while stirring sugar into my coffee. She'd moved in with him. Zeke, 37. Personal trainer. Drove a Dodge Charger he couldn't afford and wore compression shirts like they were a second skin. I'd seen him in the building before. Tall, shiny, smug. The kind of guy who uses words like alpha and refers to himself in the third person when drunk. He worked 2 floors down from her. It was probably accidental the first time. Coffee run, elevator chat, protein shake advice, then gym nights, then networking mixers, then hotel receipts for corporate retreats in nearby towns with no conference centers. She thought she was subtle. She wasn't. You don't start wearing silk lingerie on business trips for the networking. You don't suddenly care about squats and spin class when you used to call yoga cult stretching. And most of all, you don't text your husband working late from a Marriott at 11:47 p.m. with a wine glass in the frame. Not unless you're sure he's too old, too slow, too checked out to notice. Jade told her friends I was sweet but stagnant, said I was like an end table, reliable, decorative, and completely inanimate. She wanted fire. Zeke was fire. Funny how she forgot fire burns down everything it touches. I didn't call her. Didn't rage text. Didn't even delete the Spotify playlist. I left it there, song by song, like evidence in a trial she didn't know she was on trial for yet. Instead, I went upstairs, poured a scotch, and took out the business card I'd been holding onto for 3 years, back when I'd helped a buddy get through a vicious divorce. The lawyer had said, "If you ever need to protect your future, call me quietly." So I did. Next morning, 8:03 a.m., I was in a dark oak office across from a woman who wore navy-like armor and smiled like a chess player 3 moves from checkmate. She listened, took notes, asked 2 questions. "Are you sure this is the path you want to take? And how quiet do you want to be?" I said, silent, until the end. She nodded. And just like that, the counterattack began. No arguments, no pleading, no last-ditch marriage counseling funded by guilt. Jade thought she'd taken the wheel and floored it. She didn't realize I'd already mapped the exits and greased the brakes. She wanted a reaction. That much was obvious. Within days of moving in with Zeke, Jade's social media turned into a digital cologne ad, sweaty selfies with filtered sunsets, captions like she was narrating a midlife rebrand. Sometimes peace starts with burning the old script. New chapter, new fire. There was even a boomerang of her clinking glasses with Zeke at some rooftop bar downtown with a quote, "Choose passion over predictability." I didn't comment. Didn't even block her. I watched quietly, the way a hunter watches the animal walk right into the trap it thinks it's outsmarted. My name was still on the deed, still on the accounts, still on everything that actually mattered. And she was out there celebrating like she'd won a custody battle against boredom itself. So while she posed with martinis and posted about her inner goddess awakening, I did the most radical thing imaginable for a man in my shoes. I disappeared, strategically. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. No tearful monologues to friends, no whiskey-soaked barstool therapy sessions, just smiles, calm, polite, even cheerful. You see, people underestimate silence. Silence is unnerving. It's a vacuum that makes liars talk too much and betrayers second-guess themselves. Jade had counted on fury. Instead, she got nothing. That nothing haunted her. I listed the house the next week. Not on Zillow like a desperate man purging his past. No. I handed it over to a private agent. Quiet deal. All cash. Gone in days. I moved into a furnished apartment for the time being. Nothing fancy, just a base of operations. Minimal, controlled, peaceful. When the divorce papers came, I didn't fight. No alimony squabble. No demands. Just a signature and a nod. She walked away with what looked like a victory. She even texted me after, "Thanks for not making it harder than it had to be. I think this is best for both of us. You deserve someone who sees you too." I read it. Stared at the blinking cursor like it was gasping for a response, and then I didn't type a single word. She would take that silence however she wanted. Guilt. Closure. Maybe she'd convince herself I was crushed, that she'd spared me somehow. What she didn't know, and would never suspect, was that I'd already moved my retirement portfolio into a limited trust. That the cabin in Vermont she always considered just a dusty asset had been quietly refinanced into a shell company 2 months before she walked out. That the seemingly joint savings had been split long ago into 2 pipelines, one that trickled into the account she saw, and one that flowed somewhere she never would. Let her think she'd torch the old script. Let her celebrate the bonfire. I'd written a new script already, and the final act, she wouldn't be in it, but she'd sure as hell feel it. She thought she'd taken half. That's the part that still makes me chuckle when I'm sipping coffee on the deck of a cabin she thought was a waste of weekend gas, or when I open the app that tracks the rental property she never knew existed because real estate bores me. Jade walked out thinking she'd split the pie. In reality, I let her leave with a crust and a smile. It started months before her big "I've had enough" performance. Not because I suspected an affair, though the signs were there, but because I'd been married long enough to know when someone starts measuring the drapes in someone else's life. She stopped asking about money, and that was the biggest red flag. Jade always had a 6th sense for numbers. Not in a savvy way. More in a "what's mine is mine, and what's yours should also be mine" kind of way. She asked about joint savings like she was checking the weather. Casual, passing. She never touched the retirement paperwork again. She stopped pretending to care about the Vermont cabin. The shift was subtle, but to me it was seismic. So I played dumb and started moving. The limited trust was the first domino. You'd be amazed how fast a good estate lawyer can restructure your financial DNA when you show up with a calm voice and decades of quiet discipline. Retirement accounts, locked and shielded. The rentals, in her name? Not anymore. Transferred clean and quiet into a trust held by a nonprofit shell I'd co-founded with my goddaughter Danielle 3 years ago. A mentorship initiative, if anyone bothered to ask. The cabin, that dusty little A-frame we bought for leaf peeping back in 2009, retitled, refinanced, and removed from the marital asset list with the precision of a surgeon. I even sold off one of our older rental units, on paper, at a minor loss to myself, through a holding company. She wouldn't have recognized the paperwork if it danced naked in front of her holding a "You've been played" banner. By the time Jade filed, all that was left was the primary checking account, the house, which I'd already liquidated, and her leased SUV. She walked out of that final meeting thinking she'd kept things fair. That's what she told her sister. That's what she posted in one of those faux humble Instagram captions, next to a selfie of her sipping white wine in athleisure. We handled it like adults, mutual respect and fresh starts. Mutual respect. Please. I respected her enough not to humiliate her publicly. But privately, I dismantled the scaffolding of everything she assumed she'd inherit. She got half of the primary account because I let it sit fat and untouched for months. She got the car because she fought for it like it was a trophy. And she got the most dangerous thing you can ever hand someone like Jade, the illusion of victory. She thought she leveled up, but really, she just exited the game while I kept the board, the bank, and the rules. And once the dust settled, I started building something quiet, something clean, something that didn't carry the stink of someone else's compromises. She thought she left a man behind in pieces. All she really did was free up space for the next version of me. And that version didn't play fair. He played smart. The irony? I think she really believed I'd just fade. Like a smudge on her rearview mirror. 1 month after she left, I was supposed to be the image of decay. Hunched over, nursing scotch for breakfast, still sleeping on our side of the bed. That's the version of me she wanted to exist. The noble, tragic ex who mourns in silence while she does yoga on a rooftop and tells her new circle, "I hope he finds peace." But grief wasn't what I felt. Clarity, yes. Energy, absolutely. And something else, something surgical, cold, productive. I didn't rebuild out of spite. I rebuilt because I had finally been given permission to evolve. Her departure wasn't abandonment. It was clearance. A full demolition permit, signed and stamped. So I got to work. First, I bought a home. Not a giant flex. Not some ridiculous bachelor pad with LED lights and marble countertops. No. I found a 2-bedroom on a quiet hill just outside New Hope. Quaint town. Killer bookstore, real neighbors, the kind who knock when they bring you pie, not lawsuits. It had an office with sunlit windows and a garden that didn't beg for perfection. It wasn't a fortress. It was a beginning. Then I handed the reins to someone I actually trusted. Danielle, my goddaughter, 28, MBA, absolute shark in heels with a heart like polished steel. Jade always underestimated her. Called her cute, like that wasn't the most condescending adjective in existence. Danielle had been quietly managing more and more of my side business, consulting for mid-size logistics companies, while Jade rolled her eyes at every mention of it. She's sweet, Tom, but she still says like in meetings. Yeah, well, that sweet girl renegotiated a 5-year contract I'd been stuck in for a decade. And when I told her I wanted out, wanted peace, wanted her to run things full-time, she didn't hesitate. "You finally dumping the anchor?" she asked, then added with a grin. "About damn time, second dad." Danielle didn't want my sympathy. She wanted the keys. And I gave them to her. But the last move, that one was personal. I reached out to someone Jade wouldn't just not expect. She wouldn't believe it if she heard it whispered through 10 people and an anonymous letter. It took one phone call. Not long. 10 minutes, maybe less. I remember exactly what I said after the small talk. "I think it's time we caught up. I have a story for you. And a proposition." The voice on the other end paused. Just a beat. Then, "Send me a time and place." That was all it took. Jade thought I was sulking in the ruins, but I wasn't in ruins. I was in blueprints. She saw a man in his 60s and assumed the clock was winding down. What she missed was this. Men like me, we don't fade. We shed. We upgrade. We go underground, not to die, but to reinforce. And when we come back up, we don't need to knock. We own the damn door. She thought she was starting her new life. Turns out it was just a layover on someone else's layaway plan. The apartment she moved into with Zeke was one of those high-rise boxy places with quartz counters and fake modern charm. Rented, not owned. Of course, Zeke said buying was a scam by the banks, which was his way of saying I have debt, bad credit, and a phobia of adult decisions. Jade moved in thinking it was temporary, exciting, like crashing at a lover's den between chapters. But 2 weeks in, the smell of protein powder and Axe body spray no longer screamed passion. It screamed sweaty man-child with delusions of crypto grandeur. Zeke didn't cook, didn't clean, didn't even pretend to look for a place together like she'd fantasized. He just kept his gym schedule, posted shirtless selfies with corny captions like hustle excuses, and played Xbox at full volume while she tried to work remote meetings in the next room. And when she asked about long-term plans, he blinked like she'd spoken in Morse code. Plans? Chill, we're just vibing. But Jade doesn't vibe. She schedules, calculates, curates. Her fantasy was passion, sure, but her actual need was structure. Zeke was a walking chaos app with good teeth and 2 pairs of shoes, both white, both filthy. Then came the messages. She found them one night when he fell asleep on the couch mid-bench press bragging YouTube rabbit hole. His phone buzzed. The screen lit up. She reached for it, not to snoop, she'd tell herself later, just to silence it. Curiosity is a hell of a drug. The chat was with a woman named Molly. 2 scrolls in. She's got money and regrets. That's all I need, bro. She left her old dude for me, talk about free ride. Honestly, not even fun anymore. But she pays for takeout, so whatever. Jade stared at the screen like it was written in flames. This wasn't a mistake. It was a manifesto. She confronted him the next morning while he flexed in the mirror and complained about his macros. She held the phone up like a badge. He looked at the messages, blinked once, then laughed. An actual laugh, the kind that feels like spit in your face. You left your husband for this, he said, arms folded. Biceps tense like that somehow made the insult sting less. You're not even fun anymore. At least back then you were a good secret. A secret. That's all she ever was to him. An affair, a thrill. Something exciting to whisper about in locker rooms. Not someone to build with. He went back to his shake like it was over. Jade didn't cry. Not right away. She packed her work bag, left the apartment, drove aimlessly for an hour, parked in the Whole Foods lot, and just sat there staring at the steering wheel, mouth dry. She had left a quiet man with a steady life, for a loud boy with nothing but abs and a Google Calendar full of chest days. And now she couldn't go back. Not because of pride, because she didn't know who she'd be returning to. She assumed I'd still be waiting, in grief, in mourning, maybe even grateful if she changed her mind. But she hadn't noticed something crucial. While she was chasing spark, I lit the fuse. It came on a Tuesday, one of those boring, gray-skied weekdays where nothing dramatic ever happens. Until it does. Her name lit up on my phone while I was reading by the fireplace, a glass of wine in hand, a playlist softly humming in the background. I nearly didn't look. I'd trained myself by then to ignore that particular notification preview, but habit still had its claws. The message was short, neutral, polished. Hey, I hope we can be civil about everything. I miss how peaceful you were. Let me know if you'd be open to coffee sometime, just to talk. Civil, peaceful coffee. She really thought those words would do the job. No mention of what she'd done. No apology, not even a sorry for the way it ended. Just peaceful. The word she'd once weaponized against me during arguments. Why are you always so passive, so quiet? Do you even feel things anymore? Now suddenly that silence she once resented was her siren call. I stared at the screen. Read it twice. Let the message settle like sediment in a glass of water. There was something almost elegant about it. How she was trying to re-enter through the same door she'd slammed shut with heels clicking and her ego on fire. That final sentence, just to talk, that's the one that made me smile. Because just to talk isn't a peace offering. It's a scouting mission. She wanted to know if the bridge she torched had magically rebuilt itself. If the man she left was still standing in the ashes holding out a water bottle. But I wasn't in the ashes. I was across the river, with a new home, new boundaries, and better company. I didn't type a word, not sure, not maybe, not what for. I did exactly what I knew would make her stomach knot. I left it on read. Timestamp clear. Message delivered. Seen. That little gray phrase, ready 8:41 p.m., is a scalpel. It cuts quietly, leaves no mess, and says everything without a sound. Because Jade thrived on control, on responses. Even silence from me used to have rhythm. Passive-aggressive pauses followed by reluctant texts 2 days later. She knew the dance. But now she was dancing alone. And deep down, she knew what that meant. No reaction wasn't forgiveness. It was dismissal. It wasn't rage. It was irrelevance. Let her wonder what I was doing. Who I was doing it with. Let her imagine me still broken, or maybe worse, indifferent. That message sat there, unopened again in her mind, long after it had been read on my phone. And while she stared at her screen, I just poured another glass of wine and turned the page. It wasn't a revenge dinner. Not exactly. I told myself that when I made the guest list, wrote the emails, picked out the wine. It was a celebration, technically, quiet, elegant. Just 8 people around a long oak table in a home with no ghosts in the walls. But there was one invitation that carried more voltage than the rest. I sent it out of politeness. At least that's what I told myself. Jade, hosting a dinner for a new chapter. You're welcome to join if you'd like. 7 p.m. Thursday. I even put my name at the bottom, though we both knew no one else it could have been from. I figured she'd delete it. Maybe show it to a friend and laugh, or worse, misread it as desperation. But that wasn't the play. The play was clarity. You see, closure is a myth people use to keep wounds open. I didn't need closure. I needed to let her see what she walked away from. Not the man she left, but the life she forfeited. I set the table myself. 6 plates, 2 spares, linen napkins. Nothing pretentious, just enough candlelight to make the wine shimmer. I served grilled sea bass, roasted vegetables, and a lemon tart that Danielle insisted we buy from a bakery she swore by. Danielle came early, wearing a navy pantsuit, bringing her new boyfriend, a startup guy with too much hair and great manners. My friend Alan and his wife. My neighbor Ruth, who brought fresh-cut dahlias. People who mattered. People who had watched me fall apart quietly and rebuild without asking for applause. Then, at 6:59 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it. And there she was. Jade, wearing a structured blazer over a low-cut blouse, like she couldn't decide if it was a dinner or a pitch meeting. Her hair pulled back too tightly, too much perfume. Same brand, but it clung a little more desperately now. Her smile was brittle. Not the warmth of nostalgia, just the awkward muscle twitch of someone pretending they belong somewhere they don't recognize anymore. "Nice place," she said, stepping inside like a realtor who didn't get the listing. I didn't offer a tour. She looked around, noticed the framed art on the wall. Modern, minimal, no traces of the old house, of our things. She walked past the coat rack, like she might be looking for a ghost of herself hanging there. Found nothing. And then she saw the guest list. Danielle hugged her, briefly, too tightly. Jade pretended not to flinch. Alan gave her a nod that bordered on awkward. The startup guy didn't know who she was, and smiled like a Labrador. Ruth said, "Oh, you must be that Jade," and immediately turned to refill her wine. Jade blinked like someone trying to re-enter a room that had already moved on. "Didn't expect this so fast," she said to me as I handed her a glass of wine. "You were always slow to change." I smiled. Warmly, even just a little. "You taught me how quickly people can flip the script." She opened her mouth, then closed it. And then, as she turned to look toward the kitchen, she saw who else was already there. Not a friend, not a fling, not family. Someone from her world. Someone with unfinished business. Her smile slipped like paint in the rain. And that was when the real dinner began. She stepped in like she still had a key, like the air would somehow rearrange itself around her, make space, recognize her scent, welcome her back as something more than a ghost in heels. But the house didn't flinch. It was clean, intentional, lived in, but not with the clutter of survival. No piles of unopened mail, no sagging cushions or untouched wine bottles meant to signal, "I'm doing okay." This place didn't scream recovery, it whispered arrival. The lighting was soft, from real lamps, not overheads. Art hung on the walls. Real art, not mass-produced canvases with inspirational quotes about journeys and storms and sunshine. These were pieces I'd chosen myself. Modern, sparse, confident. She paused in the doorway, looking for something familiar to grab onto. But there was nothing. No photo of us. No framed wedding picture repurposed as a funny memory. No shared souvenirs. Even the scent was different. Cedar and citrus. Not the vanilla amber she used to drown the old house in. I saw her nostrils twitch, registering that fact. Perfume, check. Blazer, check. Posture, upright, confident. But the eyes flicked. scanning. She was trying to make it look like curiosity, but it reeked of inventory. "Didn't expect this so fast," she said, slowly making her way to the living room. "You were always slow to change." It was the kind of comment you make when you want someone to feel guilty for improving, framed like an observation, laced like an insult. I handed her a glass of wine, gestured to the seating area where the others mingled, then looked her right in the eye and said, "You taught me how quickly people can flip the script." Her lips twitched, just a millimeter. "You have to understand." Jade didn't blink easy. She wasn't the flustered type. She played people like chess, not poker. She liked the long game, the performance. But this room, this house, was off script for her. And she hated improv. She walked slowly past the bookcase, skimming the spines like she might spot something incriminating, some relic of her reign. There was nothing. Just strategy books, memoirs, and a few novels with well-worn spines. No chicken soup for the broken husband's soul. No bitterness framed as enlightenment. She looked back toward the kitchen and froze. Someone had just entered. I saw her shoulders tense, not visibly, just enough that someone who knew her tells, someone who'd studied them for 20 years would notice. She covered it fast, turned toward me again. "So, you really started over?" "No," I said, sipping my wine. "I just started." The clink of plates from the kitchen, soft laughter, footsteps. Jade glanced over her shoulder, curiosity outweighing caution. And that's when the final guest stepped out, and the air in the room shifted. Jade didn't know it yet, but the ground under her feet was about to collapse. And I wasn't reaching to catch her. The timing couldn't have been better if I'd scripted it. And believe me, I didn't have to. The universe has a knack for poetic timing when your hands stay clean and your ears stay open. The final guest entered from the kitchen just as Jade turned to refill her wine, still clinging to whatever scraps of dignity she thought she was balancing in her designer heels. She was mid-smirk, mid-performance, offering some polished line about how it's just nice to see people living well, when... Silence. Not the awkward kind, not even the dramatic kind. This was the kind of silence that introduces someone. All heads turned, and there she was. Clara Langford, 55, immaculate, a presence, not a person. Hair in a sleek silver twist, navy pantsuit tailored within an inch of its life. She carried a bottle of wine, of course, always prepared to contribute. But her real offering was presence. Jade's face stopped existing for a second. It just froze, blank, like her software had crashed mid-boot. Clara greeted me first, no hesitation, no awkwardness. A warm hand on my arm, a kiss on the cheek. A quiet, "It smells incredible in here. Thomas, thank you for having me. You're the only one I trust with wine this expensive." I smiled. She laughed and took the seat I'd reserved for her, next to mine, right at the head of the table. Jade stood rigid, her wine glass tilted slightly in her hand, just enough for a drop to land on the rug she'd already mentally decided was too tasteful for me to have chosen on my own. "Clara," she said, voice flat, not quite a greeting, more like a reflex. Clara glanced up, cool, casual, maybe even amused. "Oh, Jade, I almost didn't recognize you," she said with that trademark pause, just long enough to sting. "You look different." Jade tried to recover, opened her mouth, maybe to explain the obvious question no one asked, "Why is she here?" But Clara didn't wait. She turned back to me. "This is lovely. So warm. I miss warmth at dinner." I nodded, setting down my glass. "Well, this is the first time in a while where everyone at the table actually wants to be here." Another flicker across Jade's face. Anger, shame, fear. Hard to tell when the mask cracks so fast. Danielle leaned toward Jade just then. Not maliciously, just helpful. "You two know each other?" Jade didn't answer. "So I did." "They worked together," I said simply. "Jade left the company about 6 months ago, right? Wasn't that around when there was that, what did they call it, personal tension?" Clara chuckled softly. "That's one way to put it. Now let me explain something. Jade's departure from that firm wasn't a clean exit. She spun it online as a mutual separation due to philosophical differences. But internally there was a whisper trail. Words like insubordination, ethical concerns, and undermining leadership got passed around. Rumor had it she made a power play, tried to box Clara out of a major client, and it backfired spectacularly. She hadn't quit. She'd stormed out. And now here was the woman she tried to professionally assassinate, sitting at my table, sipping my wine, laughing at my jokes. Next to me. Not across, not down. Next to me. Jade sat, finally, in the only open chair, which just happened to be the least visible spot at the table. Not an accident. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. Her smirk had vanished. And in its place, a silence I hadn't seen on her face since the day she walked out of my life. Because in that moment, she finally realized she didn't just lose a husband. She lost the narrative. The clink of forks and low murmur of conversation filled the room. Nothing forced, nothing tense, at least not for anyone but her. Jade barely touched her plate. Her wine glass stayed half full. She sat stiffly, like a mannequin propped at a table she didn't pick, surrounded by people she used to look down on, or simply forget. Everyone else laughed, shared stories, leaned in. She hovered at the edge like a misplaced caption under the wrong photo. Then Clara turned to her, casually but with precision. That unmistakable executive polish. Her tone had that gleam women in power sharpen after decades of being underestimated. "So nice to see you again, Jade," she said across the rim of her wine glass, eyes warm, voice calm. "You look tired." It was delivered like a compliment. Almost. The room paused, just enough to register the weight. Jade blinked once, twice. "It's been a long week." Clara nodded. "Long weeks happen when there's cleanup to do." Jade's lip twitched. Her fork hit the plate with the smallest clank. She was cracking. I knew the signs. I raised my glass, slow and deliberate. To people who stick with you when others don't. It landed like a needle through velvet. Danielle smiled into her napkin. Alan cleared his throat to cover a chuckle. Even Ruth, bless her soul, sipped her wine in exaggerated silence. Jade stood suddenly, clutching her napkin like it might shield her from the air itself. "Well, I should." I tilted my head gently. "Oh, you don't want to miss dessert." She hesitated. "It's lemon tart," I added. Clara brought it. That was the trap. Not loud, not cruel, just devastating. Jade froze. She knew. It wasn't about the dessert. It was about the details. Lemon tart, her favorite, not mine, never was. I always found it too sharp. She used to buy it from that French bakery on Broad Street, the one that closed last year. I hadn't touched lemon anything since she left. And yet here it was. Brought by Clara. Brought by her former boss. Brought by the woman she tried to cut out of the company before leaving it in ashes. Jade's voice was low, controlled. "How long have you two—" I didn't look at her. I just folded my napkin slowly and placed it beside my empty plate. "Since the day you left me," I said, calm, even, almost tender. "Turns out," I continued, "when one person walks away, someone better might walk in." She didn't sit back down, but she didn't move either. Her hand gripped the back of the chair, knuckles white, like it might anchor her to something that hadn't been real for a long time. No one said a word, because there was nothing left to say. Her illusion, this fantasy of a man still broken, still waiting, shattered in front of a table full of witnesses. And the worst part? She'd invited herself. She didn't slam the door. That would have required conviction, some final note of control, some last-ditch display of fire. But there was no fire left. Just the hollow shuffle of heels across the tile, the slow pull of the front door, and a soft click that sounded more like resignation than exit. No goodbyes. No, we'll talk. No parting jab. Just the scent of her perfume trailing behind like an old headline no one read anymore. From the window, I saw her pause at her car. She stood beside it, hand on the handle, staring through the glass. Not at the street, but at her own reflection. Not the confident woman from her rooftop selfies. Not the fire starter from her new chapter posts. Just a woman looking at someone she didn't recognize anymore. She got in but didn't start the engine. Just sat there, still. Inside, the kitchen hummed with life. Clara was plating the lemon tart, cracking jokes about a silent auction we both knew she'd manipulated the board into winning. Danielle passed around more wine, laughing, animated, absolutely alive. Her boyfriend asked if the tart was homemade. Clara just smirked and said, "Close enough." Alan leaned in and said quietly, "You okay?" I nodded. But more than that, I felt present, anchored. This table, this night, it was mine. Built, not inherited. Chosen, not stumbled into. I poured coffee for Ruth, refilled Danielle's glass, and sat down again. Clara's hand grazed mine as I passed the sugar. It was brief, intentional, familiar. There was warmth here now. And peace, real peace. Not the brittle performative kind Jade posted about with filtered beach sunsets and misattributed quotes. Not the kind you get from running fast enough to outrun your shame. This was the kind of peace that stays. I looked at the people around me. These weren't replacements. They were reinforcements. Not new characters cast in a drama I'd lost. Just real people showing up without needing me to explain why I rebuilt, why I stayed quiet, why I never fired back. Across the room, the lemon tart gleamed under the pendant light. I didn't even like lemon. But tonight, it was perfect. And as I lifted my fork, I thought about those words, her parting shot that night at our old dinner table. I've had enough. She meant it to hurt. She meant it to cut me down, to make me feel small, invisible. But what she gave me that night wasn't loss. It was permission. Permission to let go. To strip the rust from my life. To stop fighting for someone who was already halfway out the door. And to build something that, frankly, she never would have understood. So yeah, she had enough. But me? I had just begun.